There is a strange moment most people don't talk about. A moment when trying doesn't feel motivating anymore. It feels heavy. Not painful and not dramatic. Just heavy. You wake up knowing what you're supposed to do. You even know how to do it. But your body doesn't move the way it used to. And that scares people. Because when effort disappears, the first word that shows up is lazy. That word sticks. It sinks deep. And once it is there, everything starts to sound like a personal failure. But here is something worth sitting with for a moment. Really sitting with. Lazy people don't feel frustrated about not doing enough. They don't feel guilty resting. They don't lie awake thinking about what they should have done. Exhausted people do. Exhausted people replay conversations in their head. They plan improvements they never execute. They carry invisible pressure even while doing nothing. And yet from the outside, it looks the same. Nothing happens. No progress. No visible effort. So the label feels convenient, even logical. But it is wrong. Because laziness is a lack of care. And most people listening care deeply. They care so much that caring itself has started to drain them. There's a quiet difference between someone who avoids effort and someone who is tired of putting effort into things that didn't work. That difference matters. And if you've been calling yourself lazy lately, there is a chance you have been misdiagnosing the problem. Not because you are weak, not because you are broken, but because exhaustion doesn't announce itself loudly. It just makes everything feel harder than it should. Most people don't realize when the exhaustion started. It doesn't come from one big failure. It builds quietly. It comes from trying something that almost worked, and from restarting routines again and again. It comes from getting motivated, only to watch that motivation fade. Each time you tell yourself you'll do it better next time. Smarter, more disciplined. At first, that belief helps, but eventually something shifts. Your brain starts associating effort with disappointment. It doesn't happen consciously. It happens subtly. You don't stop trying because you don't care. You stop because your mind learned a pattern. Try, push, hope, and then reset. Over and over. When the results never match the effort, the nervous system adapts. It pulls energy back and slows you down. It isn't doing this to punish you. It is doing it to protect you. That's the part most people miss. What looks like resistance is often protection. What looks like laziness is often self-preservation. Your system is saying, we've been here before. Instead of excitement, it offers hesitation. Instead of drive, it offers numbness. This doesn't mean you've lost discipline. It means your brain stopped trusting the process. And when trust disappears, effort feels pointless. So you scroll instead. You rest without feeling rested. You distract yourself, and then you judge yourself for it. That cycle is exhausting on its own. The worst part is that most advice ignores this completely. It tells people to push harder, to wake up earlier, or to add more pressure. But pressure doesn't fix exhaustion. It hides it. There is another layer to this that rarely gets named, and it's uncomfortable. Many people aren't tired from doing too little. They're tired from carrying too much mentally. Unfinished goals, unspoken expectations, and constant self-monitoring. Every day becomes a silent performance review. Am I doing enough? Am I falling behind? Why can't I just be consistent? That background noise never turns off. Even rest isn't rest anymore. It's just a pause filled with guilt. And over time, that guilt becomes heavy, heavier than the work itself. So when you finally stop pushing, your body doesn't feel relief. It feels shame. That's not laziness. That's burnout without a name. Burnout doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like quiet withdrawal. Less ambition, less movement, less belief. Not because the desire disappeared, but because hope became too expensive emotionally. And when hope costs too much, the mind chooses safety instead. Familiar routines, low risk, minimal effort. Not because you don't want more, but because wanting more started to hurt. This is why shouting motivation never works here. It talks to the surface, not the system underneath. Before anything changes, the system needs to feel understood, not judged, not corrected, just understood. And that understanding is where energy slowly returns. Not all at once, not dramatically. Before fixing anything, before planning another restart, something more important needs to happen. The blame needs to stop. Not permanently, just for now. Because as long as you believe the problem is your character, every solution will feel like punishment. And punishment doesn't create consistency, it creates fear. There is the fear of failing again, the fear of wasting effort, the fear of confirming the story you already believe about yourself. But here's a different way to look at it. If effort hasn't been working, the answer isn't more effort. It is understanding why that effort stopped making sense to your system. That understanding doesn't make you weaker. It makes you accurate. And accuracy is where real change begins. Not with hype, not with discipline challenges, not with forcing yourself into a version of life you can't sustain. Real change begins with honesty. Honesty about how tired you actually are, about how many times you've already tried, about how much pressure you've been carrying quietly. This isn't the part where anything gets fixed yet. And that is intentional, because rushing to solutions before trust is rebuilt just repeats the same cycle. Right now, all that matters is this. If you've been calling yourself lazy, there is a strong chance you've been wrong. And if that is true, then the story of what comes next needs to be written very differently. Why trying harder isn't working. For a long time, trying harder feels like the right answer. It feels responsible, mature, even admirable. When something isn't working, effort seems like the only variable you can control, so you add more of it. More hours, more discipline, more pressure. At first, that extra push creates movement. You feel productive again, alive again, briefly hopeful. But here's the part no one prepares you for. Effort does not automatically mean direction. You can pour energy into something that isn't aligned, and all that effort does is make the misalignment louder. That is when people get confused. On paper, they are doing everything right. They are waking up earlier, trying to be consistent, and pushing through resistance. Yet inside, something feels off. Effort starts to feel noisy instead of focused, busy instead of meaningful, draining instead of energizing. When effort stops producing clarity, the brain starts asking a dangerous question. What is the point? That question doesn't mean you have given up. It means your system is noticing inefficiency. Trying harder without direction is like driving faster without knowing where you are going. The speed increases, the exhaustion increases, but progress does not. Eventually, your mind connects effort with waste, and once that association forms, pushing yourself becomes harder every time. It is not because you lost discipline. It is because your brain learned that effort alone isn't safe anymore. Another reason trying harder fails is motivation. Most people treat motivation like fuel, something you either have or something you need to find. But motivation isn't fuel, it is feedback. It rises when something feels meaningful, and it disappears when something feels misaligned. The problem is, people are taught to rely on it anyway. They wait for motivation to start, or they try to force it once it fades. Both approaches create the same result: inconsistency. Motivation is emotional. It is unstable and reactive. It responds to novelty, praise, urgency, and fear, not sustainability. When you build your system around motivation, you build something fragile. It works on good days, but it collapses on quiet ones. And when it collapses repeatedly, something subtle happens. You stop trusting yourself. You promise change, then break that promise, again and again. Each broken promise doesn't just affect productivity, it affects identity. The narrative becomes, I can't stick to anything. I always fall off. There must be something wrong with me. That inner narrative grows louder than any external advice. So even when motivation briefly returns, it is overshadowed by doubt. Trying harder in this state doesn't restore momentum. It deepens the disconnect, because effort without trust feels forced, and forced effort doesn't last. It isn't because you are weak. It is because your system is protecting itself from disappointment. Would you like me to adjust the pacing of the final section to make the conclusion feel more grounded? Consistency is often praised as the ultimate solution. Just stay consistent. Do it every day. Don't break the chain. But consistency without clarity is one of the fastest paths to burnout. When you repeat actions that don't feel connected to a larger purpose, your brain struggles to justify the energy cost. So it starts negotiating. Skip today. Do it later. Rest now. Restart tomorrow. And each skipped moment becomes evidence against you. Not against the system, against you. This is where many people misunderstand what's happening. They think the problem is discipline, but discipline isn't the issue. Clarity is. When clarity is missing, consistency becomes mechanical, rigid, draining. You're following rules without understanding why they matter. And humans aren't built for that. We need meaning to sustain repetition. We need context to justify effort. Without it, consistency feels like punishment. So trying harder, being more strict or more disciplined, only increases resistance. Your body starts pushing back. Your mind starts avoiding. Not because you don't want progress, but because the process feels disconnected from who you are. This is why so many people feel burnt out even when they're doing the work. They're consistent, but not aligned, and alignment matters more than intensity. There is one more reason trying harder fails. It is rarely acknowledged. Effort multiplies pressure. Every time you tell yourself to push more, you raise the stakes. Failure no longer means the work simply did not result in success. It means you have failed again. That emotional cost adds up. Soon, effort itself becomes stressful. This is not because of the work. It is because of what that work represents. Every attempt becomes another chance to disappoint yourself. To protect you, the mind adapts. It avoids effort to avoid emotional pain. From the outside, that looks like procrastination. From the inside, it feels like relief. It is a temporary relief, but it is powerful. That relief quickly turns into guilt. And guilt drains energy faster than work ever could. So the cycle continues. Push, fail, feel guilty, avoid, repeat. Trying harder does not break this loop. It strengthens it. The problem is not how much effort you are giving. It is the relationship you have with effort itself. When effort feels like a test of your worth, it stops being a tool for growth. Before anything can change, that relationship has to soften. Effort needs to feel safe again. It cannot feel like a threat or a judgment on who you are. Until then, pushing harder will only deepen exhaustion. And that is why for so many people, trying harder has not been working. It is not because they did not want it badly enough. Effort alone was never the real issue. The real problem: behavior versus identity. Most people try to change their lives by focusing solely on what they do. New habits, new routines, and new rules. On the surface, this makes sense. Behavior is visible and measurable. It feels easy to focus on. But behavior does not exist in isolation. It lives inside something much deeper. Identity is the story you silently believe about who you are. Not the version you show to the world, but the private one. The one that says things like, "I am inconsistent," or "I always mess this up." When behavior conflicts with identity, identity wins. Every time. You can force habits for a while, and you can push routines with discipline. But if those actions do not match the way you see yourself, they feel fake. They feel temporary and unstable. The moment your effort drops, your behavior collapses back to your identity. That's why change feels so exhausting. You're not just doing the work, you're fighting your own self-image. Most people don't realize they're doing this. They think the resistance means they're lazy, or weak, or undisciplined. But resistance is often identity trying to stay consistent. Not consistent with your goals, consistent with your beliefs. If you believe you're someone who never sticks with things, your system will look for proof. It happens automatically, not consciously. This is why motivation can feel dangerous. It threatens the internal story you have lived with for years. When motivation fades, identity steps back in to restore balance. It does not do this to hurt you. It does it to keep your internal world familiar. That is the first real problem. It's not about effort or discipline. It is a quiet mismatch between who you are trying to become, working against your environment. There's another force quietly shaping everything: your environment. Most people underestimate it. They think environment means a room or a desk, but environment is anything that influences behavior without asking permission. Your phone, your notifications, your work culture, your social expectations, even the pace of information around you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Many people are trying to change themselves while staying inside the same environment that created the exhaustion. That's not a motivation problem, that's physics. If distraction is always available, focus becomes expensive. If pressure never stops, rest feels unsafe. If comparison is constant, self-trust slowly disappears. So when people say, "I know what to do, I just don't do it," they assume something is wrong inside them. But often the environment is doing most of the work. quietly, relentlessly. You don't wake up choosing distraction. You wake up surrounded by it. Fighting that all day requires energy most people don't actually have. So the system adapts. It lowers ambition. It reduces effort. It avoids friction. Not because you're weak, but because adaptation is how humans survive. Trying harder inside a draining environment doesn't build strength. It builds fatigue. Until the environment changes, or the relationship with it changes, behavior will always snap back. That isn't failure. Consumption without creation. There's a third problem hiding underneath everything. Overconsumption. Not just of entertainment, but of advice. People are constantly learning, but rarely integrating. Podcasts, videos, frameworks, strategies. Each one promises clarity, and for a moment it works. You feel informed, motivated, prepared. But that feeling fades quickly, because consumption without creation doesn't release energy. It stores tension. Your mind fills with ideas your body hasn't lived yet, and that gap becomes heavy. You know more than you apply, and that knowledge starts judging you. Now starting feels risky, because you know better. The standard is higher, the fear is stronger. So instead of acting, you prepare more. More information, more planning, waiting for the perfect moment. But preparation slowly becomes avoidance, and avoidance looks exactly like laziness from the outside. Inside, it feels like pressure. Pressure to do it right. Pressure to not waste effort again. Creation doesn't need to be public. It doesn't need to be impressive. It just needs to exist. But when consumption dominates, action feels dangerous. Because action exposes uncertainty, and uncertainty feels unsafe when you've already tried so many times before. When the system works against itself, when identity resists change, environment drains energy, and consumption replaces action, the system collapses quietly. You want change, but every path feels heavy. You know more than ever, but do less than before. You try to push and your body pulls back. Not in rebellion, in self-protection. That's why the problem feels confusing. From the outside, nothing dramatic is wrong. From the inside, everything feels misaligned. And misalignment drains energy faster than effort ever could. This is why behavioral advice fails. It treats symptoms, not systems. You weren't failing because you didn't want it badly enough. You were failing because the way you were trying was fighting deeper forces. Identity trying to stay familiar, environment pulling you backward, information replacing experience. Trying harder only increases the tension. More effort, more pressure, more exhaustion, until the system shuts down. That shutdown isn't quitting, it's preservation. And recognizing that isn't weakness, it's accuracy. Before anything actually works, the real problem has to be named. Not laziness, not lack of discipline, but a system that has been working against itself for too long. What actually works? No magic, no forcing. Fewer goals, not better ones. Most people don't fail because their goals are wrong. They fail because there are too many of them, too many directions, too many priorities, too many versions of who they think they should become. Every goal pulls on attention, even the ones you're not actively working on. And attention is energy. When attention is divided, energy leaks. So even simple tasks feel heavy. The problem isn't ambition, it's overload. The mind can hold a few clear targets. It cannot hold everything at once without paying a cost. That cost shows up as fatigue, as avoidance, as I'll do it tomorrow. Reducing goals feels uncomfortable at first. It feels like giving up, like settling. But what actually happens is focus returns. Not excitement, not motivation, clarity. And clarity is quieter than hype. When there are fewer goals, decisions become easier. You stop negotiating with yourself all day. Less inner debate, less mental noise. Progress stops feeling dramatic, but it becomes real. And real progress doesn't need constant motivation. It feeds itself slowly. Most people don't need a new goal. They need permission to let go of the ones that are quietly draining them. Not forever, just for now. Boring routines are stable routines. There's a reason exciting routines never last. They rely on emotion, energy, mood, inspiration, all unstable things. What actually works is boring, predictable, repetitive, almost forgettable. And that's not a flaw. That's the point. Boring routines don't ask for motivation. They don't ask for belief. They ask for very little. And because they ask for little, they're easier to return to. When routines are simple, missing a day doesn't feel catastrophic. There's no shame spiral. No, I ruined everything. You just come back. That's how consistency is built. Not through intensity, through recoverability. Most people design routines they can only follow on their best days. But life doesn't offer many best days, so the routine collapses. Boring routines survive average days, tired days, messy days. They don't care how you feel. They don't need emotional buy-in. They just exist. And over time, they rebuild trust with yourself, quietly, not because they're impressive, but because they're honest. Remove friction before adding discipline. Most advice tells people to add discipline. Very little advice talks about removing friction. But friction is what drains energy, not effort itself. Tiny obstacles add up. Decisions, interruptions, distractions. Each one pulls from the same limited reserve. So by the time you reach the task that matters, you're already empty. Removing friction doesn't look dramatic. It looks boring. Fewer choices, fewer inputs, fewer unnecessary decisions. Simple setups, clear defaults. When friction is low, action feels lighter. Not easier, lighter. And that difference matters. Most people try to push themselves through high friction systems. They call the exhaustion a personal flaw, but the system was heavy to begin with. Designing life to require less effort isn't laziness, it's intelligence. Doing less, consistently. The hardest shift for most people is accepting that less can be enough. Not forever, but for now. Doing less removes pressure. Pressure distorts effort. When the goal is smaller, the nervous system relaxes. And when the nervous system relaxes, energy returns. Not in a rush, not dramatically, gradually. Consistency grows best in low-pressure environments, where missing a day isn't failure, where progress isn't performative. Doing less consistently rebuilds trust, faster than doing more sporadically, because consistency sends a simple message. I can rely on myself. That message matters more than any external result. Once trust is restored, capacity increases naturally, not through force, through safety. And safety is what exhaustion has been asking for this whole time. Not motivation, not discipline, safety. When effort no longer feels like a test of worth, it becomes sustainable again. That's when change finally sticks. Not because you pushed harder, but because you stopped fighting yourself. Quiet resolution. Releasing the need to fix yourself. At some point, trying to fix yourself becomes the problem. Not because growth is bad, but because constant fixing sends a message. That message says something is always wrong. When every phase of life feels like a repair project, the nervous system never rests. Even progress feels conditional. I'll feel okay once I improve. I'll relax after I become better. That future never arrives, because the goalpost keeps moving. There's always another habit to fix, another flaw to correct, another version of yourself to chase. And chasing yourself is exhausting. The quiet truth is this: you don't need to be repaired. You've been adapting, responding, surviving. Most of what you call weakness was protection at some point. Avoidance protected you from burnout. Numbness protected you from disappointment. Lower ambition protected you from collapse. Those responses weren't mistakes. They were intelligent reactions to pressure that lasted too long. Releasing the need to fix yourself doesn't mean giving up. It means pausing the war inside. And when that war pauses, something unexpected happens. Energy stops leaking. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you stop fighting who you are while trying to become something else. Change doesn't begin with force. It begins with permission. Permission to stop treating yourself like a problem that needs constant correction. Rebuilding trust with yourself. Trust is rarely discussed in self-improvement, but it's the foundation everything rests on. When trust with yourself breaks, effort becomes fragile. You promise change, you don't follow through, and each time that happens, your system remembers. So the next promise carries less weight. Eventually, even genuine intentions feel hollow. That's not because you don't care. It's because trust has been damaged. Rebuilding trust doesn't happen through big promises. It happens through small, repeatable actions that don't require motivation. Actions so small they don't trigger resistance. Because resistance is a sign of distrust. When your system doesn't trust outcomes, it resists effort. So trust has to be earned again, quietly, by doing things you know you'll complete, even when they feel insignificant. Especially then. Consistency isn't about results. It's about reliability. Showing yourself that you mean what you say. Once that reliability returns, effort stops feeling like a gamble. It starts feeling safe, and safety is what allows momentum to grow. Not excitement, not pressure. Safety. When you trust yourself again, you stop overthinking every decision. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You act, because acting no longer threatens your self-image. That's when progress becomes quiet and real. Effort with alignment, not force. There's a difference between effort and force. Force ignores feedback. Effort listens to it. Force says push anyway. Effort asks, what's misaligned here? Most exhaustion comes from forcing. Forcing routines that don't fit your life. Forcing goals that don't match your values. Forcing timelines that don't respect your capacity. Alignment changes that relationship. When effort is aligned, it doesn't feel heroic. It feels natural. Not easy, but honest. Aligned effort doesn't require constant self-talk. It doesn't need reminders or hype. It fits. And when something fits, it doesn't demand your entire nervous system. You can leave energy for living, for relationships, for rest, for curiosity. Force consumes everything. Alignment leaves space. That space is where sustainability lives. You don't need to maximize your output. You need to respect your limits. Limits aren't weaknesses, they're information. Information about what can actually last. Once effort respects alignment, you stop oscillating between extremes. No more all in, no more complete shutdown, just steady movement. And steady movement doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel dramatic, but it keeps going when motivation disappears. Ending without pressure. There doesn't need to be a dramatic ending here. No declaration, no call to action, no promise of transformation. Just a quiet understanding. If you felt lazy, there's a good chance you were exhausted. If effort stopped working, there's a reason that made sense at the time. And if you've been hard on yourself, that pressure probably came from wanting things to be better, not from failure. You don't need to become someone new. You don't need to push harder. You don't need to prove anything. What you need is to stop betraying the version of you that already understands what's sustainable. That version has been whispering for a while, through fatigue, through resistance, through avoidance. Not to stop you, but to protect you. Listening to that signal isn't giving up. It's growing up, quietly. Nothing has to change today, but the way you see yourself can. And sometimes that shift is enough to let energy return on its own, without force, without noise, just enough to take the next honest step when it actually feels possible. And that is where real change begins.